Well, my mother came from Scalpy Harris at the age of 16 with no English. My father came from Dumfries, at what age I don't know, but with adequate English. And they collided in Edinburgh, and I was part of the fallout.
The name is Norman MacCaig. He is a poet in Scotland, a Scottish poet who writes in classical English. He's now aged 63, and he's the sort of poet who's vastly appreciated by the people who do read him, but who isn't nearly well enough known, because he is, to my mind, one of the truly great poets and great men of his time. Last autumn, he appeared on television, stunningly, in a university debate series called Mr. Speaker, Sir. And when everyone's forgotten what that series was like, no one will forget Norman MacCaig speaking for Stirling University with his passionate and poetic defence of honesty in the use of words.
The Poets' Workshop is a flat in Edinburgh, for Norman MacCaig is an Edinburgh man, heart and soul. Here the poet's words are forged, lowland words which are constantly informed by an awareness of the Highland heritage in his blood.
The Gaels, as you know, are, in their art anyway, are formal and classical, and the Borderers are, as you know, romantic. And therefore there is a tension between the two, but the Gaelic side, the Celtic side in myself, I think, wins. You know, I love things with form and shape. And even in music, I'm more a line man, a melody man, than a harmony man. In paintings, I'm more a shape man than a color man. In verse, therefore, I love form.
This love of form is the quintessence of his poetry, a lifelong love affair with the landscape of Edinburgh, of Sutherland, of the mind, the landscape of poetry itself.
Landscape and I get on together well, though I'm the talkative one. Still he can tell his symptoms of being to me, the way a shell murmurs of oceans. Loch Rannoch lapses wimpling in the sun, its hieroglyphs of light fade one by one, but recreate themselves, their message done forever and ever. The hawk knows all about it, shaking there an empty glove on steep shoots of the air, till his yellow foot cramps on a squeal to tear smooth fur, smooth feather. That sprinkling lark, jerked upward in the blue, will daze to nowhere, but leave himself in true translation, hear his song cascading through his disappearance. This means, of course, Schiehallion in my mind is more than mountain. In it, he leaves behind a meaning, an idea like a hind couched in a corrie. So then I woo the mountain, till I know the meaning of the meaning, no less. Oh, there's a Schiehallion anywhere you go. The thing is, climb it.
I have a guzzling eye for shapes and sizes, as I was saying. And landscape, to me, is my substitute for religion and politics and such trifles.
What does it mean to you, landscape, then?
Can't explain it, except that I always feel that landscapes, and the people who wander in and out, the cracks and crevices of the landscape, I always feel there's some kind of web that joins them together. And I've actually been accused of being metaphysical about landscape. An accusation, of course, which I spurn and eschew. Because it seems to me when I look at a rock, I don't want to see anything more than that rock. And yet I know when I'm in a landscape, especially a wildish one, I feel extraordinarily at home.
Have you yourself ever been tempted to write in in a more Scottish language than you do. You write, if I may say so, classical 18th century English.
No, I write contemporary Toll-cross English.
Toll-cross, Glasgow or Edinburgh?
Edinburgh. Infused and spiked, of course, with vocabularies that you don't currently hear around Toll-cross itself. But Scots is no relation. I told you I was 3/4 a Gael. If one is to speak about the language of the blood, which I hope we're not going to do, but people do, you know. And if one is to speak in terms, ridiculous terms of that sort, then I ought to be writing in Gaelic, not Scots.
Why don't you write in Gaelic?
Because I don't know the language well enough.
Have you never wanted to learn it well enough?
Mm-hmm, but I failed.
Is there any Gallicness, do you think, in your own imagery? I'm thinking of the extraordinary facility with which you can describe particularly West Coast phenomena. The idea of tarry splinters of memory on a drifter, of cormorants holding their wings out.
That's just natty reporting, you know. It cons people into supposing it's poetry just because it's brief and exact. I call them snapshot poems.
The Élan glass, engine full ahead, slavers through the sea, wolfishly making for its lair at Loughin. It brushes aside the sparkling splinters of water. The day is wildernesses, all desolate and lovely. As monumental as a monument, a blonde sheltie drowsily stares through film star eyelashes at the road, hem-stitched on the skirt of a mountain. Somewhere a lamb laments with the voice of desolation. On the sand at Achmelvich, 6 sandpipers play tig with the minch that keeps casting up and withdrawing a rinse of soiled lace infested with sand grains. And round Store Point swirls a typhoon of gulls, and under it the Élan glass, grinning through the water till it comes to rest at the pier in a green seethe of watery mushrooms and Catherine wheels, and the engine stops with a clap of silence.
I don't believe in inspiration, by the way. That's another of my dirty words. Insofar as I make any sense of the meaning of inspiration, I suppose it's a sort of Freudian one, that in your unconscious mind things are gathered, accumulated, and every little while there's a tiny little volcanic eruption, and up into your conscious mind comes something that you never thought of and can't imagine yourself thinking of. And insofar as that is any sort of explanation for inspiration, then okay, I accept it. But I don't like this wild and rolling eye and where's my singing robe stuff.
But when you are, for instance, up in the mountains in Sutherland, do you see a scene and translate the scene into words, words which later on are perhaps going to have their part in the autogenesis of a mountaineer's poem?
A good word. Lithogenesis is another one connected with it. I never think of poetry when I'm up there. Never ever. I go to the Highlands as much as I can in the summer, 6, 7, 8, luckily 10 weeks, and I never write a single word. Not interested. I'm too busy doing nothing. Fattening my camel's hump, you know, which dwindles through the winter, and I just arrive at next June or July in time. But it's not a conscious thing. I don't go around looking for subjects for poems. No, no.
What happens when you settle down to write a poem?
Nothing unusual. I just feel like writing a poem in the way one feels hungry. I have no idea what's going to come, none whatever. And I sit down there with a blank sheet of paper, and it's got to be that size these days because I am a man of habit.
None of your metric sizes?
Well, I find that if you write poems on tiny wee pages, you finish up writing tiny wee poems. I'm thinking seriously of starting to use foolscap in the hope that my poems will swell and enlarge, you know. This is nonsense, but it isn't altogether nonsense. Well, I feel I sit down with a blank sheet of paper and a completely blank mind. And into my mind comes a word or a phrase from the subconscious mind, and the poem grows from there. It's a kind of crystallization around the given phrase, word, idea, rhythm even. And quite often I don't know what the poem's going to be about till I'm, halfway through. Sometimes not till it's finished. I always put the titles on last, you see, because I don't know what it's about till I've written it. I don't think that's uncommon, but I really do not know where I'm going. This means, of course, that I'm a very slap-happy, hit-or-miss sort of writer. I write an awful lot, very fast, and put 6 out of 10 of them in the bucket.
When you say very fast, how long would a single-page poem normally take you on average?
Oh, 2 cigarettes.
Good heavens. And
Nothing
this,
to do with heaven.
from the moment, is to do with inspiration, clearly.
No, skill and agility.
And this from the moment when you sit down with the...
Blank mind.
Do you recognize afterwards the processes that went on in the making of that poem? Do you recognize why you wrote it?
I never bother. I just put it away till I look at it 2 or 3 months later and decide whether it's going into the bucket, the Scotsman, or a book.
Do you remember your poetry?
No. Thank God.
Why do you say that?
Because it bores me.
The written poetry, but not the act
Oh,
of
I love
writing.
writing them. But nothing I hate more, well, that's an exaggeration, but I hate having to pick out a poem for a magazine, or when I'm putting poems together to make a book, I'm unspeakable. I get in terrible tempers. Controlled, of course, since I'm a Celt.
Can you give me an example of one written poem and how it happened?
Yeah, I think so. I know this because I've done this before, you see, and I've got the poem handy. It's not a very good poem, but it's a nice illustration of what I'm trying to say. It's a little short thing called Water Tap. It's so short I'll read it, shall I? It's a wee tiny thing. That's what it looks like. I always like to see the shape of a poem.
What, 4 stanzas or 4 lines?
4 stanzas, 4 lines, with very, very shadowy rhymes. You know, field gold heads, bucket plate light. You know, none of this hum, drum, black, slack, rather, father, but other sorts of engaging rhymes which intrigue me. Water tap. There was this hayfield, you remember, pale gold, if it weren't hazed with 1,000,000 clover heads. A rope of water frayed down. The bucket hoisted up a plate of flashing light. The thin road screwed into hills. All ended journeys were somewhere, but far, far. You laughed by the fence, and everything that was hoisting water suddenly spilled over. Now, I know when I started that, this time it was not a word or a phrase, it was an actual visual memory of a particular hayfield in Achmelvich, Sutherland. And I just sat there, was this hayfield? See? And I said it's pale gold, except it wasn't really pale gold because it was hazed by with 1,000,000 clover heads. And then I remembered the tap at the side of the road with a flat stone for the pail to sit on. And I started a rope of water frayed down, the bucket hoisted up, a plate of flashing light. And it was only then I began to see that this poem was about things that were incompleted. The field wasn't altogether pale gold. The bucket wasn't filled. The thin road screwed into hills, but I couldn't see where it went. It was uncompleted. And then I got the image of, in fact, my wife. And when she comes into all my experiences, the buckets are filled, the roads reach their destination, etc. But I was halfway through that before I realized it was about incompleted things that can, if you're lucky, become completed. Well, you see, that's the way it generally works with myself.
There was this hayfield, you remember, pale gold if it weren't hazed with 1,000,000 clover heads. A rope of water frayed down, the bucket hoisted up a plate of flashing light. The thin road screwed into hills. All ended journeys were somewhere, but far, far. You laughed by the fence, and everything that was hoisting water suddenly spilled over.
Given this exercise of recollection and agility and skill, as you call it, what is it meant to do for the person who reads it as opposed to the person who writes it?
Took me a long time to learn lessons about that. When I started writing, well, I started writing in the 5th form at school, when our English teacher, Puggy Grant, told us that by next Wednesday he wanted a composition or a poem, and I thought, okay, a poem shorter. So I wrote a poem. Naturally, it was horrifyingly awful, although the poor man gave me 17 out of 20. And that sort of started me, and for years I wrote poems without considering for a moment that anybody else would be interested in them. And the result is that they became totally and absolutely incomprehensible. Floods of images, semi-surrealistic verbo juice. And I wasn't bothered. I just liked it, you know, easy, easy. And then I began to come to what, in my boastful mood, I call my senses. I began to realize that a poem was a sort of communication. If it was incomprehensible, it was a bad poem. So I started the long, difficult journey towards lucidity. Very hard. Terribly easy to be obscure. It's damn difficult to be lucid. So I burned all the poems I wrote before the age of 37 because they were incomprehensible balderdash. And I'm still sometimes accused of obscurity, but in my philanthropic, marshmallow-hearted way, I always agree with the fellow who makes such an accusation, and I say to him, well, if you couldn't understand it, it was not only a bad poem, it was bad manners. Because when you talk to somebody, naturally you use the language they understand. So any poems of mine which are incomprehensible to other people are bad poems and bad manners.
You've written many love poems, or poems which could go into the category of love poems, poems about relationships between a man and a woman. How much are personal relationships important in your writing of poetry?
Well, you see, when I was born, my gift of mimicry was amputated. And also, I was gifted with no powers at all of invention. And therefore, all my poems are about things which either happened to me or happened very closely to me. They're just reports of things that have happened and about which I have felt certain feelings. So that every poem, therefore, is a particular and private experience to me, but sometimes you play around with them. I mean, if one writes a lugubrious poem about a failed love affair, it doesn't mean that you've had one. But you're taking the marvelous, successful love affair that keeps just going on being marvelous and imagining, oh, what would happen if, you know, supposing something sour were dropped into it and the whole thing curdled. And you might well write a poem of that sort. But because a guy writes sad love poems, it doesn't mean that he's huddling up in some coign in Arthur's Seat, lamenting the passing away, the departure of some probably opprobrious female.
Not necessarily. But we mustn't, I mustn't fall into the mistake of talking about poetry as if it were one thing. It is such an enormously multifaceted thing. And some of your poetry is, you might say, intellectual. It is an exercise in metaphor and metaphysic and in riddles and in logic and in meaning. Others, I feel, are quite intensely felt. And I'm thinking in particular of a poem like Memorial, which you wrote after your sister's death. And I'm sure that a lot of people have found it huge consolation for themselves. But to you, was the act of writing helpful in the sense of helping you get over a personal experience?
No, I feel the same about that experience since I wrote the poem as I did before it. It didn't help at all. Poetry can be therapeutic, but it's not just therapeutic. And in a way, I don't know, it seems to me that I write more out of praise than anything else, you know, praise of existence, praise of... And in a way, even that's the saddest poem ever I wrote. And even it is a sort of poem of praise, isn't it? It's praising my sister Frances. And it's celebration, perhaps, is a better word than praise. I suppose I was celebrating that, to me, terrible experience. The worst thing that ever happened to me, worse than the death of my parents, because they'd had their innings. She hadn't. And she was a marvelous woman. And it was the injustice of her death that offended me.
Everywhere she dies. Everywhere I go, she dies. No sunrise, no city square, no lurking beautiful mountain but has her death in it. The silence of her dying sounds through the carousel of language. It's a web on which laughter stitches itself. How can my hand clasp another's when between them is that thick death, that intolerable distance? She grieves for my grief. Dying, she tells me that bird dives from the sun, that fish leaps into it. No crocus is carved more gently than the way her dying shapes my mind. But I hear too the other words, black words that make the sound of soundlessness, that name the nowhere she is continuously going into. Ever since she died, she can't stop dying. She makes me her elegy. I am a walking masterpiece, a true fiction of the ugliness of death. I am her sad music.
When I wrote that poem, which was years after she died, it was a sort of celebration of her, the effect she had on me, and she had an effect on many other people. And the mere fact of putting it into a form, a verbal shape, is a celebration. It may be a kind of personal ritual. I know that it didn't help me one bit. I still feel as disastered and lugubrious by the death of Frances as I did before I wrote the poem. Writing a poem isn't taking a pill.
A lot of people have looked at your poetry and tried to see in it a desperate, almost obsessive desire either to find yourself as a person or to conceal yourself as a person. To what extent are you aware of using poetry as this sort of pursuit of oneself?
Well, I suppose writing a poem, just conversing, any kind of verbal communication is partly discovering what you think and or feel.
Yes, how can I know what I think until I've said
Until
it?
you've said it,
Yes.
Obviously. Now that applies to conversation as well. And of course, it applies to poetry, therefore. So I suppose anybody who tries to write poetry is engaged in this search for identity, a phrase which withers my withers. Because I don't feel adjacent to myself. I don't go telescoping round looking for Norman MacCaig. I don't feel this loss of identity. That may be a fault, of course. May be a terrible fault.
But in a way, are you not doing this telescoping around yourself? If you take a poem like A Man in My Position, for instance, you're two people. There's the man, Norman MacCaig, and the man who inhabits Norman MacCaig's skull, which I call metaphysics, this kind of approach to a poem.
Hear my words carefully. Some are spoken not by me, but by a man in my position. What right has he to use my mouth? I hate him when he touches you the wrong way. Yet he loves you also, this appalling stranger who makes windows of my eyes. You see him looking out. Until he dies of my love for you, hear my words carefully, for who is talking now?
It must be very odd reading what critics say about you. People talk about middle MacCaig and early MacCaig. They're also beginning to suggest that there's a new MacCaig which is called slippered MacCaig.
Ah, yes.
That you have
MacCaig.
reached a slippered old age in your poetry before you should have done.
Ask my friend. I don't think, naturally that's an insult.
Indeed.
And of course I take it as an insult because I'm a friendly man and I wouldn't want to misunderstand my critics. All I can say to them is wait till you see the next book. Everybody suffers consecutive rejuvenations and degradations and deliquescences and solidifyings. Well, at the present moment, I mean over the last year or two, I don't know, it may be, of course, I may now be in a condition of advanced senility, because if you are, you're the only one that doesn't know it. But it doesn't seem to me to be so. I'm not discontented with the way things are going. Not boasting, just not discontented.